You are now listening to the highlight reel builder for authors, the Going North podcast. I'm your host, certified self-leadership trainer and author of the best-selling book, Stay the Course, Dom Brightman. And you're going to be getting some goodies today from the guest that's up next. How's it going, my friend? It's Dominic Dom Brightman, yours truly, the host of this wonderful show, the Going North podcast. Just coming at you real quick with an FYI. If you hear anything strange, it's because these episodes, on average, launch 2 to 4 months after the original recording date. So if you hear anything that may sound a little off to you, it's because this was recorded anywhere between 2 to 4 months ahead of time. So I just wanted to throw that out there real quick in case you heard something and it's like, hey, why didn't the host bring up that point? Or why did the guest say that? Or why did the host say that? Well, it's because 2 to 4 months ago, things are different as opposed to when you're hearing this right now. So just letting you know with that quick FYI. Now let's get on with the show. And today on the highlight reel builder for authors known as GNP, the Great, Glorious, and Glamorous, it's the Going North podcast. And one of the best things about the show, it's a magnet for super special, awesome humans across the globe. Because today's guest in particular, a retired senior foreign service officer from the U.S. Agency for International Development. That's right. And this wonderful gentleman right here provided oversight to the U.S. government foreign aid development and humanitarian assistance, and supported U.S. ambassadors as their senior development officer on multiple, you heard that right, folks, multiple U.S. embassy country teams in South Africa, and even helped them establish the Southern African Regional Leadership Center as part of President Obama's Young African Leadership Initiative. And going down the magical pipe right here, he even took some writing courses under the legendary Frank McCourt, and currently he resides in Fairfax County, Virginia in the great US of A, while their lovely adult daughter is in Africa on her own adventures indeed. So let's give it up for the one, the only, AJW himself, Mr. Alonzo Wind. How you doing today, Alonzo?
Hey, thanks very much, Dom. I'm very happy to finally have the chance to connect with you and have a good chat.
Woohoo! That's right, it's going to be good with all the O's out of 4 Cheerios boxes. That's right, it's going to be good. Oh, man. But hey, it ain't about the corny jokes for me, even though they just pop out randomly. It's about the amazing Alonzo himself. So my goodness, am I filling in any cavities I missed about you?
No, I think you covered it pretty good, soup to nuts. I very much appreciate that. I've been enjoying sharing different experiences and tales from my life in the Foreign Service, my experiences in Peace Corps. I actually just had the chance to give a class a couple of days ago at Columbia University, their School of International Affairs, talking to students about work in development and humanitarian assistance and the private sector, public-private partnership. So being able to join you for the kinds of things that you talk about on your podcast is a distinct honor.
Woohoo! It is a distinct honor to have you on, because my goodness, you are living one heck of an incredible life, because I know it's far from over, and yet, what? My goodness, my man probably has enough experiences for 2 books, but you're keeping it at 1 just for the moment, I'm assuming.
Just for the moment, but I've got sketched out actually a couple of other books that I want to hopefully be able to bring to completion before too much longer. I don't know if I'll get it done before the end of the year or early next year, but talking about my African adventures and my experiences in Asia.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's going to be one heck of an awesome read. So, my goodness, what led you to really getting involved with the foreign service? Like, my goodness, for the US of A, was it like a desire to travel? And it's like, oh, I just, used a scratch off ticket metaphorically, and voila, I'm working for the government.
Well, I have to tell you, that may be the case for some people, because, from people that I've come to know in the Foreign Service, there are certainly plenty who've had it as their life ambition pretty much from the start. But in my case, it was really completely different. I mean, I went to school at the University of Chicago studying health policy and political science. I was a pre-med originally before organic chemistry convinced me of the errors of my ways, and I had to kind of focus outside of medicine and more in the area of health from the politics side. But I had this ambition since I was a boy to go into the Peace Corps. I was caught up in, all of the vision really that had lasted through the 60s into the 70s about the kind of optimism that Peace Corps represented, the idea of giving something back to others. But my original plan was to go off as a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years and then return back to the States, likely get involved in elected politics. I had all these ambitions of running for state representative in Illinois. Um, and I had been involved as a volunteer with the John Anderson campaign, which probably dates me considerably back in the time of the Reagan Carter Anderson fight in 1980. But that proved not to be the case. I got completely turned around.
Ah, that's what I'm talking about, indeed. So they got you good, huh?
They got me good. I fell in love with the country. I was in Ecuador in South America, and I fell in love with the people. And I just felt very moved by the experience. And I found myself invited actually by the Ecuadorian Minister of Health to stay on in Ecuador for another several years. I stayed on for about 3 more years, working with a non-governmental organization, an NGO called Plan International, used to be known as Foster Parents Plan back in the day. And I was training their health promoters, developing literacy programs, not only in Spanish, but also in some of the indigenous languages in the region, and trying to improve the quality of the sort of integrated rural development they were doing in these villages of Bolivar province in Ecuador. This was after my 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer. After 5 years in Ecuador, I found myself actually headhunted by these folks out of Phoenix, Arizona, who had this small nonprofit, originally sponsored by the church or strongly supported by the Catholic Church, but implementing a modest health project in the Chaco region of Bolivia. And they wanted me to go out as the director of the project, but also to build up a country program for them in Bolivia. And as circumstances would turn out, over 5 years, I remained in the Chaco and in Bolivia and built up a major public health and agriculture program for this organization. After a total of 10 years between Ecuador and Bolivia, I had my first taste directly with Peru when the USAID health officer who was in La Paz, Bolivia, who had become a bit of a mentor to me and really kind of encouraging me to think about a career, a lifetime vocation in this work, told me about a job they were recruiting for at the USAID mission in Lima, Peru, not far, of course, from where I was in Bolivia. And kind of the trick of the pony there was that Peru was beginning to show signs of urban terrorism. You had car bombs in the streets. You had kidnappings. You had all sorts of things going on from Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path Marxist terrorist group at that time. So a number of other people had been evacuated. They were looking for someone um, maybe young and foolish to be able to take up responsibilities in that way. I was very fluent in my Spanish, and I was able to pass to some extent in terms of local responsibilities, local contact with people there. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it at first, Dom, to tell you the truth, because I was not one to really work for the man. I did not want to work for the US government. I had this very strong suspicion about working for USAID, working for the Foreign Service. I didn't want to get involved in it. But my mentor said to me, no, 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 this is special. This isn't career. Don't worry about that. This is just a 2-year contract where you'll be the project coordinator. And this is what he told me, Dom, you'll learn the folk ways of the enemy. And I like that. I like the way that sounded. The folk ways of the enemy. And so we ended up doing an interview with the mission in Lima. And pretty soon I was off to Peru. And really, by that time, after over 10 years in South America, in the Andean countries, I was pretty much locked into what would become my lifetime vocation. And in fact, in Peru, that's where I met my wife, and that's where our daughter was born.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. And funny enough, I believe that's where you got your nickname Alonzo from when you were in Peru, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or was that Bolivia?
No, to be honest, that was even back in Ecuador days. I'd been in Ecuador as a health volunteer, and the folks, they couldn't quite pronounce my name. My birth name was Allan with 2 L's and an A. And in Spanish, particularly in the Spanish of that environment, it didn't quite come out right. And so they decided to Latinize the name. They called me Alonzo, although with a Z rather than an S. And of course, since I was working in health, that meant I must be a doctor. So I was Doctor Alonzo. And the name kind of stuck. People knew me by that name, have known me by that name in a range of countries, not only across Latin America, but years afterwards across many different African countries and in the Middle East.
Nice. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. That's right. That's right, indeed. So, with that wonderful nickname, do you think that helped you to really overcome the quote unquote ugly American presence when you're overseas?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure the name helped me so much compared to the attitude. I certainly didn't go into any of the communities that I worked in with any kind of chip on my shoulder or thinking that somehow I knew better. I was very humble of the fact that, frankly, I was quite young starting out. I was very young as a Peace Corps volunteer. I was basically right out of college, just 21 when we landed in Ecuador. And by the time I got to Bolivia as a country director, I mean, I was like 25, 26 years old, and a lot of my peers, were easily 10, 15, 20 years older than I was in terms of other organizations. But I believed in, listening to the people, having, what you call this process of active listening to listen to people's problems, throw back at them what it is that you're hearing, and helping to understand better in what way I and the organization I was working for could help them out. Above all, to become more self reliant in terms of either health or education or agricultural development projects. But certainly, it's a reality that people who have come into working overseas at US embassies and other ways all too often carry, whether they realize it or not, that picture for others of the ugly American. And I think, maybe it got better for a time, but certainly in the last administration, I'm sure it got substantially worse.
Oh, yeah. Yep. It's like, oh, we're making progress. Hooray. Oh, darn. 10 steps back. Darn it.
Well, it's true, and it's true in a lot of different ways. I have to say, I don't want to be criticizing the Foreign Service so much, at least not from the start. I ended up spending almost 20 years first working with different non-governmental organizations before I ultimately actually came in as a career Foreign Service officer in 1999, carrying a diplomatic passport and with those sorts of credentials in terms of working with government counterparts around the world. But the reality is the Foreign Service that I came into, and as I look at the 2 decades since, oddly enough, Dom, became less and less diverse. I mean, I think it's fair to say that the Foreign Service today, sadly, is a lot more white and much less diverse in terms of the involvement of people of color than 20, 30 years ago. And the percentage of women, particularly in more senior positions of the Foreign Service, is not that great. Certainly not what you would expect from an organization that's supposed to be representing what the U.S. is all about overseas.
Wow, that's definitely kind of interesting too. It's like, especially nowadays, where that seems to be one of the main things that a lot of folks are really harping about is like, hey, we would like more diversity everywhere, and especially in higher echelon positions, and not just to fill a spot. Do you think that may be because of, I guess, certain parts of the world, especially like maybe in the Middle East, where it's a little harder for women to get around due to some old traditional ways that they may be thinking about?
Well, I think it's a lot of different things. The Foreign Service originally was very sexist in certain ways. Women were allowed to join at a certain point. Initially, it was just a all men kind of operation. I think, if I'm not mistaken, women were first allowed to join the Foreign Service sometime in the 1960s or um, maybe late 60s, early 70s. But for the longest time, there was this rule that women, single women, were able to work in the Foreign Service, usually at lower positions, almost like a secretarial position rather than higher positions. But it was expected that if they got married, or when they got married, that they were expected to then resign from the Foreign Service, because certainly they couldn't be married and then continuing in the Foreign Service in that way without taking care of their husband. I mean, that was the attitude that existed for decades. Now, of course, it's different now, but I think that there's a challenge in terms of the recruitment of people into the Foreign Service, and the last administration made things really so much worse. I mean, when you had the kinds of people that the last administration appointed to head up the State Department, really, one monster after another, there's been a tremendous drop in interest from people in terms of going the traditional route of joining the Foreign Service, which is to take the Foreign Service exam, and then if you pass, go through these oral simulations, and if you pass that, then be able to join what they call an A100 class and work for a couple of years in a consulate, usually at one of the visa mills in Mexico or Dominican Republic, in terms of paying your dues. You've seen a real drop off in terms of the number of people even willing to take the exam, because they've seen really the Foreign Service reduced uh, in a terrible degree, particularly by the horrible abuses of the last administration. Um, Within an agency like USAID, where I worked, it's different. There's probably a little bit better diversity in the Foreign Service at USAID compared to the State Department. People come in with on the basis of their professional credentials. There's a recruitment looking to people who actually have skills in particular key areas rather than just being generalists. And I think that at least over the last 10, 15 years, there's been, perhaps even the last couple of decades, there's been something of an effort to try to recruit more Latinos, more African Americans to try to do better gender-wise, but it's still a bit of an uphill battle. I think people have this idea in their head that they may or may not be welcome in that kind of environment. There's been also probably too long a tradition that those African Americans who came into the Foreign Service frequently were kind of shuffled off to uh, difficult places in Africa and only there, as if somehow they were the only ones equipped to deal with that kind of environment. And all too many Latinos and Latinas found themselves basically only working in Latin American countries in the Americas without having, a more expansive level of engagement in other parts of the world. There are plenty of exceptions, but that's been true to a certain extent for a lot of people.
Definitely very interesting indeed. And heck, even with the USA Department, it does make sense to at least try to make progress with that because it would make sense to, well, for the lack of a better word, infiltrate certain parts of the world if you have more people that look a little closer to the regions that you're trying to reach, I would think.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I think there's been more of at least an effort to try to do that in terms of recruiting other people, offering something of a greater diversity compared to, what you may see in some of the traditional State Department ranks. But, part of the motive of the book was to also, send a message out to young people about my own experiences within the Foreign Service, within NGOs working in development, as a Peace Corps volunteer, and really try to spark some interest in the idea of service in terms of a national service commitment. The value of that, I think, certainly in my own personal experience, having joined the Peace Corps, I know it was a life-changing experience, one that really turned things around. Sure, there were plenty of difficulties as well over the years, but overall, I mean, I think I had a far more enriched life and much more diverse experiences as a result of what I gained from the Peace Corps. And, I think, that's what's guided me into the direction that life has taken. But when I look at circumstances today, as we're kind of coming to hopefully the close of, or at least beginning to wind down the pandemic, I think it's important to promote some sort of a debate, some sort of dialogue about the idea of national service writ large, both international in terms of what Peace Corps has meant and what it could mean in the future for people, as well as domestic service here in the United States. I think there's a lot to be said for actually having some sort of a service obligation. We don't have a draft anymore. We haven't had a draft since after the Vietnam War. No one wants to necessarily return to the draft, although the reality of an all volunteer army has a whole range of difficult characteristics and problems in its own right, in that so small a percentage of Americans end up having really any sort of upfront and personal understanding of what military service actually means. But if it's not military service, at least some sort of humanitarian service that forces you to kind of come together with people who you might not normally have got to know, people from different social and economic backgrounds, being put into a situation where you're being forced to give of yourself to help others and perhaps learn some practical skills that might actually benefit you later on and might actually leave you in a better position to make some life choices, be it after high school or after college, rather than just assuming that, one model fits all. I mean, really looking at, a more diverse kind of background. I've known actually people who worked in technical areas as a Peace Corps volunteer, be it in the area of agriculture or small animal husbandry or well drilling, building of latrines, and they ended up deciding on more technical kind of roles for themselves back in the States rather than necessarily getting caught up in the college experience, the way it's been kicked around.
Yep, you could probably say that again because colleges, especially, a lot of folks definitely are starting to rethink the whole straight to college out of high school route. And this may be one of the answers, including taking up a trade, to really consider just going the humanitarian route and then go the route of service and eventually servant leadership. So, with your years being basically, I guess I'd say, a servant leader across the globe, what were
Thank you.
probably the three major skills that you picked up as a result that you feel like you may not would have received or gotten if you didn't spend time overseas?
Well, that's really a great question. I think the first is I had plenty of opportunity to eat humble pie, if you know what I mean. Um, you know, when I was a kid, I went to a really good high school in New York City and went to a great college. And I'm sure I thought a lot of myself. I'm sure I was quite the smartass. But in the sorts of circumstances that I found myself in, both in Peace Corps and then working in different non-governmental organizations, I came to really come to appreciate the tremendous value and wisdom of dealing with people in very humble circumstances, people who were, what you would consider to be poorly educated in a formal way, but very well educated, perhaps from the school of hard knocks in terms of the sorts of life experiences they had had to face. Be it just the kinds of things that you have to do to survive, or coming to face with circumstances of war or civil war or famine or natural disasters, and how people rise up and face and overcome those sorts of challenges. I mean, it really was a humbling experience to get to know people like that. So I think I'd have to place that as really number one there. I think another thing I learned, certainly as a leadership experience over the years, as I grew to lead larger and larger organizations, as I grew to become a deputy mission director and a mission director in a number of different countries, different types of environments, is I came to appreciate the skills of active listening. I think I was alluding to this a little bit earlier. And, we've got lots of kind of sayings, where people talk about the fact of, well, there's a good reason why you have two ears and one mouth, because you should be listening twice as much as you're talking. And, that's kind of a common wisdom that's really true, in terms of working with teams, knowing how to listen to people and their problems, and to not be carrying on a conversation where someone is talking to you and explaining something, and you're immediately focusing on what you're going to say back in response, but being able to use active listening and inquiry and feedback as leadership tools to help you determine whether or not someone that you're working with on a team needs to have more delegation of responsibility, whether or not they need you to be a little bit more directive in terms of how to lead them, whether they want you to be a little bit more hands off and really helping to empower them. And usually people do appreciate that. And so I came to hopefully become a better leader as a result of working with very diverse teams, people from lots of different cultures, not only the Americans and Foreign Service nationals that I would work with, but very often what we call third country nationals, people from other nationalities that might be working within a development program or within a development mission.
Nice. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. Yes, indeed. Oh yeah, because that humble pie we got it. It's gonna come for us every once in a while in life. It's gonna hit us hard. It's like we just gotta eat it, and then all the way to the active listening, which is probably, oh my goodness, it's always needed, but I feel like sometimes it's needed now more than ever, thanks to the folks who love to use social media and be keyboard warriors.
The thing that I also really came to appreciate, Dom, and I know others may have talked about this as well on your show, perhaps, but it really is also a bit humbling when you're in an international environment, when you're in a different country, coming to appreciate that. You talked about the ugly American concept a moment ago, but really, people don't hate America. They don't hate Americans. They respond to people the way basically they would want to be treated, the way they would want to be responded to, and I found a tremendous openness and willingness of people that, in fact, had suffered at the hands of the Americans in different circumstances, treating me with the utmost affectionate and warmth and hospitality. One of the countries that I came to appreciate most in terms of my own service was Iraq. I served in Iraq twice under different circumstances, and I came to really appreciate and take the time to listen to Iraqis about their experiences, their families, their culture, their food, their aspirations, and really come to appreciate and build some lasting relationships with people, despite the terrible suffering that many people had went through with the invasion of Iraq and the overthrow of Saddam Hussein and the extended occupation. And unfortunately, the bloodbath that went on for quite a few years after that, after American troops ended up leaving and ISIS ended up flowing over the Syrian border and murdering many Iraqi innocents. I mean, I came to really become very deeply touched and affected by the efforts that people made to help me understand and appreciate what they were going through, but in a way that made it clear that they took me for who I was, rather than putting me into, some sort of box of, oh, this is another one of these Americans, another one of these imperialists, another one of these dangers that have come onto the scene all too often in some of these countries.
That's what I'm talking about right there, indeed. And it's good to know, indeed, because sometimes in some parts of the world, folks may think that some Americans may walk with a certain air of confidence, and some may take that the wrong way, as opposed to folks like you. It seems like you weren't able to have that part of the experience, at least for the most part, and be able to show them, like, hey, like I'm here to bring some goodwill here. It's not all sugar and rainbows, and hey, we're the best country in all of the freaking galaxy. Forget about Earth, we're the best country in the whole galaxy here. We're coming for the Andromeda galaxy. Like, it's actually just really seems like you've learned a lot, especially with accepting different cultures and learning from them too, and just having that openness to learn as well.
It's so important, and our daughter, we brought her up around the world. As a child, she was very much an international child and became very fluid and easy to pass between one culture and another. We had a funny experience once when we were in Angola in central Western Africa, and we sent her off to participate in this journalism seminar, actually back in New York City. I think it was something that was hosted at Columbia University's campus in Manhattan. And when we called long distance in terms of trying to track her down and all of that to the dorm that she was staying in while she was part of this program. It was always warming to us to hear her described by the folks that were there as, oh, you mean, when we would ask for her name, they would say, oh, you mean the African girl? Yeah, the African girl, sure. And you know, the fact that she had lived so many years in Africa, even though she doesn't look African, but nevertheless, I mean, that was a kind of feeling that people had. And it wasn't something of kind of cultural appropriation, which seems to be so much on the minds of people these days. I mean, you hear about these Twitter storms from people in this kind of woke environment, constantly focused in on the any kind of transgression of that nature. Not at all. I mean, it was just she was just so comfortable with all of her friends from Africa and her experiences in Africa that that's the way they saw her. She felt very comfortable in all sorts of environments, and as you mentioned, she was in South Africa with us. She ended up going off on her own to Cape Town and getting involved in her own sorts of activities after college, and ultimately marrying a South African, and really coming to very much express the love that we've had for South Africa and the continent as a whole.
Sweet. Definitely gotta love stories like that, especially when children get to have that experience, the international experiences, experiencing different cultures. It feels like it may even give them an advantage as more well rounded individual and just being, again, heck, even that openness to just being curious about other cultures and just accepting folks for who and what they are. So, since you've been on this podcast tour recently promoting the wonderful book that's out now and the book that's going to be, well, should I say books that are going to be coming out after this one, is there a question that you wish should be asked more often?
I haven't had too many people asking me actually about experiences closer to home, asking me about our time in the Dominican Republic and in Haiti, in Central America, even though that's probably closer to people's awareness, and often they know a little bit more about that than sometimes other parts of the world. I guess sometimes people tend to focus in more on the fact that I had spent a significant amount of time in the foreign service, but haven't really asked what was the day-to-day life in terms of living and working in an embassy. What was the kind of circumstances of characterized with the life in the foreign service in a number of these countries. At least so far, I haven't had questions like that.
Uh, Solid indeed. I mean, especially the ADP, especially nowadays, all the stuff that's going on there. My goodness. So the day-to-day life at an embassy, my goodness. Am I going deeper into that, especially if there may be someone looking to see, like, hey, let me see if I can get out of the U.S. of A and explore some other countries and maybe work for an embassy.
Well, one of the things that I mentioned, I think a bit, or I've tried to talk about in some of my classes on a more academic side, looking to our presence overseas, is the tremendous challenge of what's been the bunkerization of U.S. embassies, if you know what I mean. I mean, basically, the conversion of so many of our U.S. embassies into these walled off, super high tech bunkers, faceless, no character, no personality, far removed from city centers, very inconvenient for locals to try to approach or access. It's not universal, but there's been all too much of that pattern, and it's something that certainly began to accelerate after 9/11, and perhaps even more after the as well after the embassy bombings in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam in East Africa. And I think that we've lost something in that. It used to be, in fact, that USAID as an agency would typically be located outside of the US Embassy, often to be able to be more accessible and more reachable by people coming from different walks of life. But now, with our hyper focus on security and the hyper concern about avoiding all risks at all costs, particularly after the experiences of Benghazi as well, and the way that was handled by the Congress and by the administration back then, there's this idea that somehow, we've got to build these barriers that protect to a maximum extent our people overseas, but which also end up all too often sending, I think, a difficult message in terms of the kinds of social, cross cultural benefits that could be gained from easy accessibility. Life in the Foreign Service has always been something of a risk, but I think that this focus on security to overwhelming everything else is not really to our benefit in terms of building up the kinds of diplomatic and cultural relationships, as I say, with folks from other countries.
That's what I'm talking about right there. Yeah, because you're definitely right. 'Cause you don't want to really send the wrong message to folks, especially overseas. Because again, with the communication differences, there may be different style, and some folks may read into the mission the wrong way. It's like, hey, we're trying to build goodwill here. We're not trying to protect ourselves completely from everybody's evil here. Like, no, that's not the message we're really trying to send here. So that's definitely important that you mentioned that.
For an agency like USAID, we actually depend uh, in a very large extent on folks from the country that we are working in to do so much of our work. They're called sometimes Foreign Service nationals, sometimes cooperating country nationals. But the bottom line is that your typical USAID mission may have perhaps anywhere from 6 to 60, depending on the size of the mission and the size of the embassy, US Foreign Service professionals working within it, but then you're going to have a much larger number of people from the country that you're working in, people who are experts in the area of health, education, agriculture, um, economic development, people who are experts in terms of management, in terms of financial management, in terms of contracting. And they play a very important role as well in terms of helping us to be able to project that overall experience of US aid overseas. If we had to rely only on um Americans, if we had to rely only on people coming from the United States, it would be far more expensive, and we probably would be far more clueless about some of the realities in the countries that we're trying to help. That's something that I think a lot of people don't realize is also part of life in an embassy, particularly in a USAID mission.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. That's right. That's right, indeed. The blessings of having a wonderful professor on the podcast, baby. That's right. You get to learn some things. And this is a professor that actually lived their experiences, which is even twice as good. Well, a fun question, one that you probably haven't even had yet that I've been torturing some guests with. Well, then again, torture is probably a bad word, but hey, it's all good. It's all good. So, this particular awesome book, your memoir, Andean Adventures, if it was a particular food item, what would it be and why?
Food item. Uh, Gosh, I could think of all sorts of things. I think probably in the case of the Andean countries, one of the things that I most remember is Choco Con Queso. Um, Choco Con Queso is, this, particularly this Andean corn. Now, we're not talking about the kind of little corn on the cob that you get here in the States with the pieces of corn that look like little teeth or something like that. I mean, we're talking about, a massive cob with really big kernels of corn, easily maybe 3 or 4 times the size. And the flavor of eating that with some basic queso blanco, the white cheese, sometimes, well, certainly very homemade, very salty from being kept in salt water to preserve it. I mean, that was really something special. In Peru, I also came to really love the ceviche. For those of you who haven't had the chance to try it, ceviche is this wonderful dish made with fish that is essentially cooked, if we can say that in kind of open air quotes, cooked with the actual lemon juice or lime juice. It's this very acidic kind of uh, Peruvian green lime that cooks the fish, and then you eat it with kind of like a sweet potato and some spice, some chopped onion. That's also probably one of my favorite dishes.
Woohoo! Well, that's what you're gonna get with this wonderful book, folks. I'm telling you, that's right. That's right. It's preserved. It's got wonderful stories of Alan's life indeed. And that's not even all of them. It's probably maybe 30% of them.
Oh,
That's right.
yeah. Plenty of stories that I could tell. I know we're coming up already on 55 minutes on the hour, and, I could certainly drone on and on far more than you'd want to have me taking up the airspace in terms of stories on there. But that's why I certainly invite your listeners, if they're at all interested in terms of the kinds of things that we've been talking about, service overseas, national service, the experience of a Peace Corps volunteer. I include some of the more gruesome gastrointestinal experiences, as well as some more other types of dangers that I ran into of a more conventional nature. The experiences in Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. I certainly encourage people to take a look at the book on Amazon. It's available as a Kindle ebook, paperback. It's now available as a hardcover as well for those that prefer that. And since April, it's been up by Audible and Amazon as well as an audiobook.
Woohoo! That's what I'm talking about indeed, folks. That's right. So you can get it in many and all forms, y'all. There's no escape indeed. You can have the book be read to you while you're reading it as well, folks. So that's right. So buy some magical copies of the book. Buy 7 of them. Buy 7 for yourself, your friends. Heck, maybe even a penguin or two indeed. So we're coming down to the magical question every guest gets to receive before we close up shop, and that is if you're to wake up tomorrow with all of your magical experience and you're 25 again in the current year, what advice would you give to yourself?
What advice would I give to myself? I would remind myself to be patient, to go, don't get myself locked into career too quickly, to look for opportunities, to get to know the world. Certainly, I did my own sort of traveling around South America after my Peace Corps experience. I spent several months hitchhiking down to the very tip of South America, the very tip of Tierra del Fuego. But I also wish that when I was younger, I'd spent more time getting to know other parts of the world. I've come to know many countries over the years, but as a 20 or 25-year-old, I certainly wish that I'd had a chance to do more of that and to be able to use that to help inform some of the later life decisions that I would come to make.
Nice. That's what I'm talking about indeed. Yes, because patience is definitely a requirement. And definitely take advantage of those opportunities if they show up indeed. That's right. Because you'll one day you might get to grow up to be like Alonzo here and have a whole wealth of stories to share with the world so that way they can learn and grow indeed. So, once again, for the folks who want to not only buy the book but keep on the lookout for your future works, what's the best way for folks to do so?
Well, they can take a look at my website, join the blog or the newsletter that I put out from time to time. The website is ennoble.net. That's ENABLEENNOBLE.net. They can look for me on Facebook. I've got a Facebook page, Allan Wind Author, in which I sometimes talk about other experiences that go beyond what's in the book. They can look on Amazon at my author page there if they're at all interested, or find me in other social media.
Woohoo! Well, there you have it, folks. Be sure to catch up with Alonzo here. Subscribe to the newsletter for all future updates and be on the lookout for the follow up book to this one, too, indeed, because it's going to be just as good, if not even better, folks. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, any parting words before we close up shop?
Well, above all, Dom, I have to thank you very much for your patience in terms of having me on. I know we had some difficulty initially in terms of coordinating times and dates and all that, but I have very much enjoyed the chance to have a chance to share my story on your show. I think what you're doing through this podcast is certainly an act of service as well. I'm sure it's of great benefit to your wide listening audience.
This is your host, Don Brightman. Hope you enjoyed what you just heard. And if you really did, do me a solid and leave a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, wherever you're listening to. And subscribe to hear more because more is coming your way to advance you further than before.